Hey there, beautiful humans. Welcome back to Untamed Ember, the podcast where we explore intimacy, sexuality, and embodiment through the lens of nervous system awareness. I'm your host, Dr. Misty, and if you're a person who participates in kink practices or is interested in kink, today we're diving deep into something that touches every single intimate interaction you'll ever have. Personal responsibility in consensual kink. If you've spent 5 minutes in kink spaces, or if you've even Googled BDSM 101, you've heard these acronyms, SSC, RAC, PRIC. They roll off tongues at workshops, they're printed on dungeon walls, they're the holy trinity of kink education. But what do they actually mean? Not the textbook definitions, I'm talking about what they mean for your body. What they mean for a nervous system that doesn't run on default settings. What they mean when your brain is wired with ADHD, autism, trauma, or any other flavor of neurodivergence. For neurodivergent, trauma-impacted, or otherwise uniquely wired brains, safety isn't just about contracts and checklists. It's not just about having the right conversations or ticking the consent box. It's about how our bodies register safety in real time. It's about whether our nervous systems can actually stay present for the yes we give. Today, we're breaking down SSC, RAC, PRIC, and a newer approach called SSICK through the lens of nervous system safety. We're going to talk about why consent isn't just a signature on paper, it's an embodied state. We're going to give you tools to make these frameworks actually work for bodies and brains that need more than the standard approach. So buckle up because we're about to get real about what embodied consent actually looks like. Let's start with some history, because understanding where these frameworks came from helps us understand both their power and their limitations. SSC, safe, sane, and consensual, emerged in the 1980s as kink communities were fighting for legitimacy and safety. Before SSC, mainstream psychology pathologized all kink as mental illness. The DSM classified pretty much any non-vanilla sexual practice as a disorder. So SSC was revolutionary. It was saying, no, we're not sick. We're people making informed choices about our bodies and our pleasure. Safe meant we're taking precautions. We're learning about our equipment. We're talking about boundaries. We're not being reckless. Sane meant we're of sound mind. We're not doing this because we're having a psychotic break or because we hate ourselves. And consensual meant everyone involved is saying yes freely without any coercion. This was huge. SSC literally saved lives. It created a framework for communities to police themselves, to kick out predators, to center the idea that all participants deserved safety and choice. It was the foundation that let kink communities grow and thrive. But here's where it gets interesting. As these communities grew, people started noticing the cracks in SSC. First, safe. Safe according to whom? Safer for whom? Activities that feel completely safe to one person might be terrifying to another. And who gets to decide what constitutes safe enough? If I'm a trauma survivor, my risk tolerance might be different from someone who isn't. If I'm disabled, what's safe for my body might be different from what's safe for an able body. Then there's sane. Oh boy, sane. This is where SSC really shows its limitations. Sane by whose standards? According to mainstream psychology in the 80s, being kinky at all was not sane. According to ableist society today, having a mental illness means you're not sane. According to neurotypical standards, stimming or having meltdowns isn't sane. You see the problem? Sane as a requirement for consent basically says, if your brain works differently, if you process the world differently, if you have trauma responses or neurodivergent traits, then maybe your consent doesn't count as much. Maybe you're not as qualified to make decisions about your own body. This is why in the 1990s, communities started moving towards RAC, risk-aware consensual kink. RAC was brilliant because it acknowledged something SSC couldn't. All intimacy involves risk, all of it. Vanilla sex involves risk. Holding hands involves risk. Living in a body involves risk. The question isn't whether something is safe, it's whether everyone involved understands the risks and is choosing to take them anyway. RAC said instead of pretending we can eliminate risk, let's get really honest about it. Let's talk about what could go wrong. Let's make sure everyone knows what they're signing up for. Let's trust people to make informed decisions about their own bodies, even if those decisions involve risk. This was more inclusive because it didn't require you to meet some external standard of sanity. It just required you to be aware and choosing. It acknowledged that different people have different risk tolerances, and that's okay. But even RAC had limitations. It put a lot of emphasis on individual responsibility, which sounds good in theory, but what happens when someone doesn't have access to good information? What happens when someone's trauma responses make it hard for them to assess risk accurately? What happens when power dynamics or social pressure influence what feels like a free choice? This is where PRIC and SSICK come in: personal responsibility in consensual kink and self-awareness, safety, informed consensual kink. These newer frameworks try to address some of RAC's blind spots. PRIC emphasizes that everyone, not just the person taking the risk, has responsibility for safety and consent. If you're the person with more experience, more social power, or more knowledge, you have responsibility to use that ethically. SSICK adds self-awareness to the mix. It acknowledges that good consent requires knowing yourself, your triggers, your patterns, your nervous system responses. And it brings safety back in, but in a more nuanced way that can be defined by the people involved rather than by external standard. All of these frameworks matter. They've created scaffolding that has made intimate communities safer and more consensual. But here's what I've noticed. They're all primarily cognitive frameworks. They're about having the right conversations, making the right agreements, thinking through the right scenarios. And that's important, but your body doesn't speak in acronyms. Your nervous system doesn't respond to intellectual frameworks. Your body speaks in sensations, in heart rate and breath and muscle tension and gut feelings. So what happens when we bring the body into those frameworks? What happens when we center nervous system safety alongside cognitive consent? That's what we're exploring next. Here's what nobody tells you about consent. It's not just about what you think or what you decide or what you say. Consent is also an embodied state. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for safety and threat. It's doing this below the level of conscious awareness, faster than your thinking brain can keep up with. And here's the crucial part. Your nervous system can veto your consent at any time. You might intellectually agree to something. You might want it. You might even think you're enjoying it. But if your nervous system reads it as a threat, your body will start shutting down or revving up in ways that take you out of presence, out of connection, out of the very thing you consented to. This is where polyvagal theory becomes essential for understanding consent. Dr. Stephen Porges' research shows us that we have essentially three nervous system states. Ventral vagal, this is our social engagement state. We feel safe, connected, and present. Our heart rate is regulated, our breathing is easy, we can access our full range of emotions and sensations. This is the only state from which true consent is possible. Sympathetic, this is fight or flight. Heart racing, adrenaline pumping, hypervigilant. In this state, we might say yes, but it's often a yes from panic or pressure, not genuine choice. And dorsal vagal, this is shut down, collapse, and freeze. Going through the motions, feeling disconnected from our bodies, saying yes because we can't access no. Here's what this means for consent. If someone says yes from sympathetic activation or dorsal shutdown, that yes doesn't have the same quality as a yes from ventral safety. It's not necessarily invalid. Sometimes we consciously choose to do challenging things that activate our nervous systems, but we need to be aware of what state we're in and make choices accordingly. And here's where it gets really important for neurodivergent and trauma-impacted folks. Our nervous systems might read risk differently than the frameworks assume. If you have ADHD, your impulse control and risk assessment might be different. You might say yes to something because it seems exciting in the moment without fully processing potential consequences. Or you might avoid things that could be wonderful because your rejection sensitivity makes any risk feel huge. If you're autistic, you might have sensory sensitivities that make certain activities overwhelming in ways that aren't obvious to partners. You might have difficulty reading social cues about whether it's safe to say no. and you might mask so well that partners don't even realize that you're struggling. If you're a trauma survivor, your nervous system might perceive threats that aren't there, or miss threats that are there. You might fawn, saying yes to please others rather than from a genuine desire. You might dissociate during activities, checking out in ways that partners don't notice. None of this means neurodivergent or trauma-impacted people can't consent. That would be its own form of oppression. But it does mean that we need frameworks that account for these different nervous system realities. Let me give you an example. Traditional SSC might say, we talked about boundaries, we have safe words, we're both sane adults, so we're good to go. But what if one person has a trauma history with being restrained and halfway through a bondage scene, they hit a trigger they didn't even know that they had? Their body goes into freeze response. They can't access their safe word. They seem compliant, but they're actually dissociated. RAC might handle this better. It would emphasize ongoing awareness of risk and response. But even RAC might miss the subtlety of trauma responses if partners aren't educated about nervous system states. This is why I keep coming back to this question. Safe for who? Sane by whose standards? Risk according to what nervous system? When we leave the body out of the conversation, when we don't account for the beautiful diversity of nervous systems, we risk replicating the same exclusion that kink was supposed to liberate us from. Let me tell you about Sarah, not her real name. Sarah is autistic and kinky. She loves rope bondage. The pressure feels regulating to her nervous system. But Sarah also has a pattern of saying yes when she means maybe, because she's learned that saying no often leads to conflict, and conflict dysregulates her for days. In a traditional consent framework, Sarah's yes would be taken at face value. She's an adult, she's articulate, she knows what rope bondage involves, but Sarah's yes might actually be coming from her trauma response around people-pleasing, not from what Sarah needs is partners who understand that her initial yes might need more exploration, who know to look for her specific signs of authenticity versus compliance, who understand that for her nervous system, consent is an ongoing conversation with her body, not just a one-time agreement. Or consider Marcus, who has ADHD. Marcus gets really excited about trying new things. His impulsivity and novelty seeking can be a superpower in kink. But Marcus also has trouble with executive function and planning. He might enthusiastically consent to a scene without thinking through practical details like aftercare needs or scheduling. Traditional frameworks might see Marcus's enthusiasm as clear consent. And it is, but Marcus benefits from partners who help him slow down and think through the logistics, who check in about his capacity to advocate for himself when he's in subspace, who know that his exuberance doesn't necessarily mean he's thought through all the implications. The point isn't that neurodivergent or trauma-impacted people can't consent. The point is that consent isn't a one-size-fits-all. It needs to account for the gorgeous diversity of how different nervous systems work. And here's the beautiful thing. When we center nervous system awareness, when we get curious about embodied consent, it doesn't just help marginalized folks, it helps everyone. Because we all have nervous systems. We all have moments when our bodies know things our minds haven't caught up to yet. So how do we translate these existing frameworks, SSC, RAC, PRIC, SSICK, into something that honors the body? How do we make consent more embodied? That's what we're diving into next. All right, so we've established that these consent frameworks matter, but they need a nervous system upgrade. Let's go through each one and explore how we can make them more embodied, more inclusive of different nervous system realities. Let's start with SSC, but I'm going to propose a small but crucial change. Instead of sane, let's talk about self-aware. Safe, but safe according to your nervous system, not some external standard. This means learning to read your body's signals. What does safety feel like in your body? For some people, safety feels like a warm, grounded sensation in their belly. For others, it's easy breathing, relaxed shoulders, or a sense of spaciousness in their chest. I want you to think about a time when you felt genuinely safe. Maybe you were being held by someone you trusted, or sitting in your favorite spot in nature, or laughing with friends. What did that feel like in your body? That's your baseline for embodied safety. Now, safe doesn't mean no activation. You might choose activities that are thrilling, that get your heart racing, that take you to your edge. But there's a difference between the activation of excitement and the activation of genuine threat. Learning to tell the difference is key. Self-aware. This replaces sane with something much more useful. Self-awareness means knowing your patterns, your triggers, your nervous system responses. It means being able to distinguish between a yes from authentic desire and a yes from fawning or people-pleasing. It means knowing when you're in a clear headspace to make decisions and when you might need to slow down. For neurodivergent folks, self-awareness might include knowing your sensory needs, your communication style, your meltdown or shutdown warning signs. For trauma survivors, it might mean knowing your triggers, your dissociation cues, your window of tolerance. But here's what's beautiful about framing it as self-awareness rather than sanity. It's a practice, not a judgment. You don't have to be perfectly self-aware to be worthy of pleasure and connection. Self-awareness is something you develop over time with curiosity and compassion. Consensual from a ventral vagal state when possible. This means checking not just whether someone is saying yes, but what state they're saying yes from. Are they present in their body? Do they seem genuinely engaged? Or do they seem checked out, pressured, or activated? This also means understanding that consent can change moment to moment as nervous system states shift. Someone might start a scene feeling great and then hit a trigger or get overwhelmed. The consent framework needs to be flexible enough to honor that. RAC is already pretty body-friendly because it acknowledges that risk perception is subjective, but let's add some nervous system awareness. Risk aware, but aware that risk perception is nervous system dependent. What feels risky to a hypervigilant trauma brain might feel boring to a sensation-seeking ADHD brain. What feels manageable to someone in a regulated state might feel overwhelming to someone who's already activated. This means getting curious about how your nervous system assesses risk. Do you tend to be risk-averse, risk-seeking? Does your risk tolerance change with your cycle, your stress levels, your sleep? There's no right answer, but awareness helps you make choices that actually fit your current capacity. I'm adding responsive here because RAC sometimes gets interpreted as anything goes as long as we've talked about it first. But embodied RAC means staying responsive to what's actually happening in the moment, not just what you agreed to beforehand. If someone starts to dissociate, if breath patterns change, if muscle tension shifts, these are all important data points that might call for a pause or adjustment, even if everything was pre-negotiated. Consensual connection. I'm emphasizing connection here because consent isn't just about individual autonomy. It's about staying connected to yourself and your partners throughout an experience. When we lose connection to our bodies, to each other, to the present moment, consent becomes much more fragile. PRIC is about shared responsibility, which is especially important when we consider nervous system diversity. Personal responsibility, but responsibility that includes nervous system awareness. This means taking responsibility for learning about your own patterns and communicating them. If you know you tend to fawn, it's your responsibility to share that with partners. If you know you have trouble accessing safe words when overwhelmed, it's your responsibility to work out alternative signals. But it also means taking responsibility for your impact on others' nervous systems. If you're in a position of more experience or social power, you have extra responsibility to create conditions where authentic consent is possible. Connected. I'm adding this because personal responsibility doesn't mean individual isolation. We need to stay connected to ourselves and to each other. This is especially important for folks whose nervous systems might disconnect as a protection mechanism. Consensual kink, but with the understanding that consent is an ongoing dance between nervous systems, not just a one-time agreement. SSICK is relatively new, but I love that it includes self-awareness. Let me add a somatic component. Self-aware, we talked about this with SSC, knowing your patterns, your triggers, and your responses. Somatic, that's my addition. Somatic means body-based. It means staying connected to your embodied experience throughout an encounter. It means using your body's wisdom alongside your cognitive knowledge. Informed, but informed about nervous system responses as well as physical techniques. Understanding trauma responses, polyvagal states, neurodivergent communication styles. You don't need a psychology degree, but basic nervous system literacy helps everyone make better choices. Connected to yourself, to your partners, to the present moment. Disconnection is often the first sign that something needs attention. Consensual, from as regulated a state as possible, with ongoing check-ins as states shift. Now, let me give you some practical examples of what this looks like. Traditional negotiation might sound like, I want to try rope bondage. Are you okay with that? Do you have any hard limits? What's your safe word? Embodied negotiation includes, I'm curious about rope bondage. How does that land in your body when I say that? What does excitement feel like for you versus anxiety? What helps you stay present when you're physically restricted? How do you usually communicate when words are hard to access? Traditional check-ins might be, how are you doing? Green, yellow, or red? Embodied check-ins include, I'm noticing your breathing has changed. How are you feeling in your body right now? Do you need anything different? Let's pause for a moment and just breathe together. Traditional aftercare might be, do you want water? Do you want to cuddle? Embodied aftercare includes, what does your nervous system need right now? Do you need pressure or space, sound or silence, movement or stillness? How can we help your body integrate this experience? The goal isn't to make things more complicated. The goal is to make them more real, more responsive to the actual humans involved rather than some theoretical ideal. But knowing the frameworks is just the beginning. What really matters is having practical tools you can use in real time. So let's talk about what nervous system informed consent actually looks like in practice. Okay, so we've reframed the frameworks. Now let's get practical. How do you actually implement nervous system aware consent? What does it look like to center the body in intimate negotiations? First, let's expand our check-in vocabulary beyond green, yellow, and red, or are you okay? Those are useful, but they're cognitive frameworks. Bodies communicate in different languages. Learn to notice. Breathing patterns. Is breathing deep and easy or shallow and rapid? Has the rhythm changed? Muscle tension. Are shoulders creeping up towards ears? Is jaw clenched? Are hands making fists? Eye contact and facial expression. Are eyes present and engaged or glazed over? Is facial expression animated or blank? Vocal quality. Is voice strong and resonant or thin and restrained? Are there changes in pitch or volume? Movement and posture. Is the body open and fluid or rigid and closed off? These aren't diagnostic tools. You're not trying to read minds or make assumptions. You're gathering information to inform your check-ins. Instead of just, are you okay? Try, I'm noticing your breathing has changed. How are you feeling? Your body seems tense. Do you need anything different right now? You've gotten really quiet. What's happening for you? I can feel your energy shift. Want to pause and check in? The red, yellow, green system is great, but let's map it to nervous system states. Green equals ventral vagal, present, connected, able to communicate needs, breathing is easy, body feels alive and responsive. This is where authentic consent lives. Yellow, early sympathetic activation, maybe excited nervous system arousal, maybe early stress response. Energy is high, but might be moving towards overwhelm. This isn't necessarily a stop sign, but it's a pay attention sign. Red equals full sympathetic activation, fight or flight, or dorsal shutdown, freeze and collapse. Heart racing or feeling disconnected from the body, difficulty accessing words or clear thinking. This is a pause or stop until nervous system settles. But here's the nuance. Some activities are supposed to create activation. That's often the point. The question isn't whether there's activation, but whether it's the kind of activation the person wants and can integrate. For autistic folks, direct communication often works better than hints. I need you to tell me directly if something isn't working, even if you think it might hurt my feelings. If I stim, rock, or go quiet, I need you to pause and check in. It doesn't necessarily mean stop, but I need a moment to communicate what's happening. I might need extra time to process and respond to check-ins. Please don't interpret silence as consent. For ADHD folks who might struggle with impulse control or future thinking, I'm really excited about this, but I want to slow down and think through logistics before we start. Can we build in reminders for me to check in with my body? I sometimes get carried away and forget to notice what I'm feeling. I might need help advocating for myself if I get into subspace. Can we set up a system where you check in even if I seem fine? For trauma survivors who might struggle with fawning or accessing authentic choice, I have a pattern of saying yes when I mean maybe. Can you help me slow down and really check in with what I want? If I seem to suddenly get compliant or go quiet, that might be a freeze response. Please pause and help me reconnect with my body. I might need extra time and space to feel into whether this is really a yes for me. Nervous system aware consent starts before any clothes come off. How you prepare for and transition into intimate space matters enormously. Here's some ideas. Take a few minutes to just breathe together before starting anything. This helps nervous systems co-regulate. Do a body scan. How are you feeling in your body right now? What do you notice? Share your current capacity. I had a stressful day, so I'm feeling a bit activated. I still want to connect, but I might need extra check-ins. Create sensory anchors. Maybe that's a particular playlist, lighting candles, having a weighted blanket available, or setting out fidget toys. For neurodivergent folks especially, transitions can be hard. Building in rituals that help nervous systems shift gears can make a huge difference. Traditional aftercare often looks like cuddling and talking, and that's great for some nervous systems, but not all. Nervous system-informed aftercare asks, what does your body need to integrate this experience and return to regulation? That might be physical pressure like weighted blankets, tight hugs, or lying on top of each other. Or physical space like separate beds, cool air, or room to stretch. Or sound, music, talking, humming, or complete silence. Or movement, dancing, stretching, walking, or staying very still. Stimulation, bright lights, engaging conversation, or calm, dim lights, and minimal talking. For autistic folks, aftercare might include stim toys, special interests, or time to process alone. For ADHD folks, it might include movement or engaging activities to help transition. For trauma survivors, it might include grounding techniques or specific reassurances. The key is asking, not assuming. What does your nervous system need right now is a much better question than do you want to cuddle? Sometimes, despite all our preparation, nervous systems get overwhelmed. Having a plan for this isn't pessimistic, it's realistic and caring. If someone goes into fight or flight, stop whatever you're doing. Help them slow down their breathing. Offer grounding techniques, feeling their feet on the floor, naming things they can see, hear, and touch. Don't take it personally. This is a nervous system response, not a judgment. If someone goes into freeze and shutdown, stop and create safety. Don't overwhelm with questions. Offer simple choices. Do you want me to stay close or give you space? Help them reconnect with their body slowly. Can you feel your feet? Can you take a deep breath? The goal isn't to fix the activation, it's to provide safety while the nervous system naturally returns to regulation. Individual consent practices are important, but they exist within community culture. How do we create communities that support embodied consent? Here's some ideas. Education about nervous system basics and trauma responses. Normalizing conversations about mental health, neurodivergence, and different needs. Creating multiple ways to communicate. Not everyone processes verbally in the same way. Having clear protocols for when things go wrong. And centering marginalized voices in community leadership. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, but before we wrap up, I want to offer you a practical exercise to help integrate what we've talked about. I want to invite you into a micro practice right now. Whether you're walking, driving, or sitting still, you can do this. Think of a moment when you said yes, but your body said maybe. This doesn't have to be about sex or kink. It could be agreeing to plans when you were exhausted, saying you were fine when you weren't, or going along with something that didn't quite feel right. What did your body feel like in that moment? Was your breath shallow? Did your stomach knot? Was your jaw clenched? Did your shoulders creep up towards your ears? Did you feel a sense of disconnection, like you were floating outside of your body? Don't judge whatever comes up. Just notice. That's your nervous system speaking. That's the wisdom your body carries about what feels safe and what doesn't. Now, think of a time when you said yes and your whole body was on board. When you felt excited, engaged, and present, what did that feel like? Maybe warmth in your chest, easy breathing, a sense of aliveness or expansion? That contrast, that's the difference between consent from activation or shutdown versus consent from regulation and presence. Your body knows. It's always known. Consent isn't about the words we say. It's about whether our bodies can stay present for the yes we give. And the more we learn to listen to those subtle signals, the more we can honor them in ourselves and in our partners. So here we are at the end of our deep dive into consent frameworks for nervous system safety. SSC, RAC, PRIC, SICK, these frameworks matter. They've created scaffolding that has made intimate communities safer and more consensual. But they only become truly transformative when we translate them into nervous system safety. Your consent is only as strong as your body's ability to stay present for it. And here's what I want you to remember. Honoring your nervous system isn't a limitation on your sexuality. It's a pathway to more authentic, more connected, more embodied pleasure. When we center nervous system awareness, we're not making things more complicated. We're making them more real. We're acknowledging that we're not just minds having ideas about consent. We're embodied beings whose bodies carry wisdom around safety, connection, and authentic choice. Whether you're neurodivergent, trauma impacted, or just a human being with a nervous system, which is all of us, you deserve intimate experiences that honor your whole self. You deserve partners who see your nervous system needs not as obstacles to work around, but as important information that helps create better connection. And if you're someone's partner, if you're holding space for another person's vulnerability, remember, the goal isn't perfect navigation. The goal is presence, curiosity, and responsiveness. The goal is creating conditions where authentic consent becomes possible. If today's conversation gave you a new language for thinking about safety and consent, hit subscribe to Untamed Ember wherever you get your podcasts. And join my free newsletter at untamedember.kit.com for weekly deep dives into embodied sexuality, nervous system awareness, and creating cultures of consent. Until next time, stay curious, stay embodied, and remember, your nervous system is not the enemy of your sexuality. It's your guide to what authentic pleasure actually feels like. See you next time.